Just 1 week after we got married, my husband cut off his traditional bangle and pretended he had never agreed to wear it. I discovered he had lied to me for 4 years. Before I start telling my story, tell me where you're watching this video from. Let's go. I always knew my life would change when I left my village, but I never imagined it would be like this, not completely anyway. I came to the United States at 21 years old, full of hope, wanting to explore the world, but never abandoning who I was. My culture, my family, my traditions, all of it was part of me, as essential as the air I breathed. 5 years passed. 5 years of adapting to a new country, of learning a different language, of navigating between two worlds that often seemed completely opposite. But I hadn't left my village to become American. I had come to grow, to learn, but to carry with me everything my people had taught me. I met my husband at a cafe near my workplace. He was American, of course, raised here, with those American values so different from mine, but there was something about him that drew me in. Maybe it was the curiosity in his eyes when I spoke about my life back home, or the way he really seemed to listen when I shared stories my grandmother told me when I was little. A few weeks after we started dating, in one of those moments between joking and seriousness, he said, "I'm going to marry you." I laughed, thinking he was just being romantic in an American way. But then I started telling him how marriage works in my culture, explaining the rituals, the importance of traditions, the deep meaning of each ceremony. His eyes lit up as I spoke. He looked at me with an admiration I had never seen before and said something I would hold in my heart in the years to come. "It's so beautiful. All of this is so beautiful." In that moment, I believed he truly understood, that he really wanted to be part of this world I brought with me. The years passed, and he kept saying the same things. Whenever my family came to visit, he asked questions about our traditions. When we watched weddings of friends from the village by video, he'd ask me to explain every detail of the ceremony. Always with admiration. Always with respect. Or so I thought. We talked several times about how we would be married. He suggested having 2 weddings, one from my culture and one American, so both traditions would be honored. I agreed. Actually, I was touched by the idea. It showed he was committed to understanding and respecting who I was. In my village, when 2 people get married, they both receive a gold bangle. It's like a wedding ring, but much more significant for us. It's not just a symbol, it's a bond. The bangle is molded onto your wrist and cannot be easily removed. It stays there, permanently, reminding you every moment who you chose to share your life with. What makes this even more special is that the gold that forms my husband's bangle comes from my own bangle. Generations of my family have been passed through this gold, from my grandmothers to my mother, from my mother to me, and now to him. It's as if the entire history of my family is being woven around his wrist. It's a living legacy. When I mentioned this to him, many years ago, he was silent for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "I will wear it with honor. Always." I believed him. We discussed his bangle being thin and small, so it wouldn't interfere with his watches and wouldn't be so visible if he wanted it to be. He participated in the design. He was enthusiastic throughout the entire process. He really was. When the day of my traditional wedding arrived, I felt like I was floating. My entire village was there. My parents, my grandmother, my uncles, aunts, cousins I hadn't seen in 5 years. The music, the colors, the smell of candles and flowers. It was as if a piece of my home had been transported here. And my husband was there in the midst of all of it, wearing the traditional clothes that his family helped him choose, participating in each ritual, promising before God, my family, and that entire community that he would honor not just me, but also my roots. When they placed the bangle on my wrist, I felt its weight. But it wasn't a bad weight. It was comforting. It was as if my mother, my grandmother, all the women before me were there with me, embracing me through that gold. And when they placed his bangle on, he looked at his wrist and then at me, with a smile that made me believe he really understood the magnitude of that moment. During the celebration, he took pictures of his bangle, sending them to his friends, with messages saying things like, "Look how beautiful," and "My wife is incredible for sharing all of this with me." He seemed genuinely happy. Genuinely grateful. That's what hurts the most, you know? It's not just what he did afterward. It's all this falseness that came before. All this performance of him really caring. I stayed in the village for a week after the wedding. I needed to be close to my family, breathe the air of the place where I grew up, eat the fruits that my grandmother planted in her garden. These fruits that are my favorites, that my grandmother and I ate together when I was little, that I just can't find here in the United States. I brought some home with me. So happy to be able to share them with my husband. I thought it would be a beautiful link between him and my country, a small connection to my world. He made a joke about the smell. Said he hoped he wouldn't have to smell that every day at home. I thought it was just a joke. I wasn't angry after all. I hate the smell of sausages, and God knows he loves that, so I understood that not everything one person loves will be loved by another. Marriage is about compromise, right? But still, that phrase stayed with me. A small seed of doubt that I didn't want to plant, but that began to grow anyway. When I returned to the United States, I was excited to see my husband. I had so many things to tell, so many stories to share. But he came home late from work, and when we finally saw each other, I was already asleep. We spent the first night we'd seen each other and 5 days sleeping. We had dinner the next night. It was all fine normal. But then I noticed. His wrist was empty. "Where is your bangle?" I asked, hoping there would be a simple explanation. Maybe it had fallen off. Maybe it was being cleaned. Anything but this. "Oh," he said casually, "I thought it was just for the party." My heart sank. I was so confused that I had to blink several times, as if I could refocus reality if I did it enough. "What do you mean, just for the party?" "We talked about this. Many times. It's for life." He sighed, as if I had said something absurd. "Come on, you can't seriously expect me to wear this all the time." "Why not?" My voice came out small hurt. "You said you would." "It was making me look unprofessional," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. As if I should have understood that all along. As if my culture, my legacy, my people, had to make sense in terms of American professionalism. I left the room. I couldn't even look at him. Later, he called me. He started explaining that the bangle had no cultural significance for him. That was the last straw. I exploded. So I asked, my phone trembling in my hand, "Would you be okay if I didn't wear my American wedding ring? After all, it has no cultural significance for me." He was silent for a moment. Then he got furious. He started a lecture about how, if we were in my country, he would wear the bangle. As if that meant something. As if that made a difference. In that moment, that feeling I had guarded so carefully, that love I had built so slowly with him, began to disintegrate. I didn't want to do this anymore. I didn't want to be in a marriage where my identity was an inconvenience, where my people were something beautiful to look at, but inconvenient to live with. I thought about asking for an annulment. I thought about going back to my village and forgetting that all of this had happened. I thought about how many other lies were still hidden in our relationship, waiting to blow up in my face. But then I remembered what my grandfather always said: before making a big decision, always talk first. Always understand first. So I breathed. And I decided we would have a real conversation. Because I deserved honest answers. And maybe, just maybe, he deserved a chance to give them to me. The next morning, I sent him a message saying I was ready to talk. He responded almost immediately, saying he would come in a few minutes. I was at a nearby hotel. I had left home the night before because I couldn't be in the same place as him at that moment. When he arrived, I could see he hadn't slept well. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he seemed to be carrying the weight of something he had finally become aware of. We sat in silence for a few moments. I didn't know where to begin. How do you explain to someone who isn't from your culture how much that meant? How do you translate generations of tradition into words that make sense for someone raised in a completely different system? But I started. I told him how the bangle wasn't just a bracelet. I explained that when my father and mother got married, they took a piece of gold from their own bangles, ones they had received when they were born, and molded together a new bangle. And when my grandfather and grandmother got married, the same thing happened. It was a cycle that repeated through generations. It was history. It was family. It was love transformed into gold. "Do you understand?" I asked, my voice breaking a little. "That bangle that you cut? It contained pieces of my great-grandfather, my grandmother, my parents, my entire lineage. And now it's destroyed." He looked at me, and I could see that something in his expression had changed. Maybe he finally understood. Maybe. "If you had told me from the beginning that you didn't want to wear it, that would be fine," I continued. "We could have bought new gold to make a bangle just for you. You could have one, without my legacy being sacrificed. Or we could have made one that was removable, something you could take off whenever you wanted." He opened his mouth as if to say something, but I raised my hand. "Or," I said, and I felt tears streaming down my face, "if you had told me that you absolutely couldn't do this no matter what, I would have let you go. We would have separated before the wedding. Before I sacrificed all of this thinking you understood. Before I put my faith in you." He asked to see the bangle. We went to his house, and he showed me what he had done. When I saw it, my heart simply stopped beating. It hadn't just been cut. It had been melted. Completely melted into several different pieces. All the delicate shape that he had designed, the one he had made seem so insignificant, was completely destroyed. Unrecognizable. What did you do? I whispered. I went to a jeweler and asked them to cut it, he said, his voice weak. But I think he made a mistake. He melted it instead of just cutting it. You let him melt it? You didn't stop? You didn't say no. He didn't respond. In that moment, something inside me changed. It was no longer just about the bangle. It was about the fact that he had gone to a jeweler and asked to have it removed without even telling me. He had seen me and noticed I didn't have his bangle on my wrist and never mentioned it. He waited for me to notice. He waited for me to discover it. And now, when I asked him why he had done that, he was telling me it hadn't been intentional. That he didn't think it was so important. That he simply hadn't thought about it. But he had thought about it for 4 years. You were basically divorcing me, I said, and my voice came out like a whisper from someone who had been deeply betrayed. You don't have to wear yours either, he replied defensively, as if that were an acceptable solution. Something exploded in me. You lied to me. I screamed. You lied for 4 years. You looked me in the eyes and said you understood. That it was beautiful. That you would honor it. And a week after we got married, you go and remove a piece of your history. Of my history. You're exaggerating, he said, his voice getting louder too. You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's not nothing. I was crying now, tears running down my face. You lied to me about something you knew was important to me. And then you did it secretly. And when I found out, you acted like I was ridiculous for being hurt. There was a lot of back and forth after that. He kept insisting that I was making a big fuss over nothing. I kept trying to make him understand that it wasn't about the bangle itself. It was about the trust that had been broken. It was about how he had deceived me not just once, but consistently over years. What else did you lie to me about? I finally asked, my voice exhausted. What else do you agree to but secretly don't want? How many other things are you just waiting to destroy after we get married? He had no answer. I took an Uber home. But before I left, I did something that hurt more than anything I had ever done. I went back home, called a jeweler, and had my own bangle removed. It wasn't easy. My bangle had been with me my entire life. I slept with it, bathed with it, lived with it. It was like removing a part of myself. But I couldn't wear it anymore. Not after this. Every time I saw it, it would remind me of the betrayal, of the falseness, of the feeling of having my legacy destroyed. When I removed my bangle, I felt like I had removed a part of my soul. I brought it to him. I brought the bangle that my parents gave me when I was born, that had been my mother's, that had been my grandmother's, and I threw it on his desk as if it were trash. Because at that moment, if he couldn't value his own bangle, what did I expect him to do with mine? I called my parents and told them everything. My father wasn't immediately furious. He simply remained silent as I explained. When I finished, I heard my father sigh, a sigh that was heavy with years of wisdom. After I hung up, my father called my husband. I have no idea what was said in that conversation, but when my father called me back, it was clear that it was over. He and my mother began to mourn my marriage. Not with anger, but with a deep and resigned sadness, as if they knew that something sacred had been broken. My father agreed to make me a new bangle. But I knew it wouldn't be the same. That one had been made when I was born, carrying all those generations of love and protection. This new one would be made for a woman who had been betrayed. It would be beautiful, but marked by pain. I asked to pause the American wedding. After trying to convince me otherwise, he agreed. I wanted to talk more with him, to revisit all the other things we had discussed over the years, all those promises he had made. I wanted to know if there were other things he had only conceded to please me, only to seem like he understood, only to buy time until he was secure enough to simply do what he wanted. I called his friend to take me to the airport the next morning, because my husband didn't respond to any messages all night. He finally got in touch with his friend, who drove to my place and took me. I was going back home to my own state, to that small refuge I had rented when I came to the United States. 2 days later, he arrived. He drove all night to be with me, and he started apologizing. I'm sorry, he said over and over. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll fix everything. I'll put the bangle back on. I'll have it repaired. But I just looked at him, and I felt nothing. Well, that wasn't true. I felt something. I felt a profound emptiness. A feeling that someone I thought I knew had been replaced by a stranger. It doesn't matter anymore, I said calmly. The bangle is destroyed. The design is ruined. You can put it back on, but I already know the truth. Every time I saw it on your wrist, I would know you didn't want it there. And I can't live like that. He insisted on staying until we resolved things. But what was there to resolve? He had broken something that couldn't be fixed. At least, not completely. Still, I made a list. Everything we had discussed over the years. All those things he had agreed to do, to be, to respect. And I asked again, hoping that this time he would be honest. His response almost killed me. About several things, he admitted that he had actually never fully agreed. That he had only agreed because I wanted him to. That he had just been pretending. So many times. So many things that I thought we had settled, that we had agreed on, that he had understood. It had all been a lie. A performance. He had been an actor in my life for years. How can I know if anything else is true? I asked. How can I trust anything you say after this? He didn't have a good answer. He kept coming every day, staying at a nearby hotel, trying to talk. But there was nothing new to say. He just repeated the same apologies, the same promises I no longer believed. My father had posted pictures of me at the traditional wedding with my bangle. After I removed it, he posted again, this time with a message implying that I was a single woman. He started sending me contacts of men who might be interested in me. Men from our village who honored our traditions. Men who wouldn't pretend to understand just to win my heart. I removed all the pictures from the traditional wedding from my social media. Every smile, every beautiful moment, all deleted. It was as if I was trying to erase that day from my memory, as if I could undo the betrayal simply by erasing the evidence of it. Sometimes people would tell me, but it was just a bangle. You shouldn't end a marriage over a bangle. But they didn't understand. They never would, unless they also lost something that took generations to build. Unless someone who said they loved everything about you suddenly decided that all of it was an inconvenience. It wasn't about the bangle. It was about the fact that he had chosen me. After years of saying he understood, that he respected, that he loved, he had chosen me, and then he had chosen himself. His feelings of professionalism. His concern about what others thought. His convenience. Chosen all of that over me. And I had to wonder, if he could do that with something I had entrusted to his care, something that came from my own family, what else could he do secretly? What else could he lie about? My father kept sending those contacts every day. At first, I ignored them, deleted the messages without even reading them. But as the days went on, as my husband kept coming to the nearby hotel, kept trying to talk to me without saying anything new, I began to think about those men differently. Not because I was interested in them, I barely knew them. But because they represented something. They represented a world where I didn't have to question every word someone said. A world where my culture wasn't an inconvenience, but the foundation of everything. One night, after another day of exhausting conversations with my husband, where he just repeated, "I'm sorry," without really understanding what he had done, I finally asked something that had been held inside me. "Do you really love me?" I asked. Or did you love the idea of me? The idea of being that liberal guy who understands other cultures, who is in a cross-cultural relationship, who is so open and progressive. He looked at me as if he had been punched. "How can you ask that?" "Of course I love you. But you don't respect me," I said, and my voice was firmer now, clearer. Because respecting someone means honoring what is important to her, even if it's not important to you. Respect means not pretending to understand something for years just so you can do exactly what you wanted to do from the beginning. He tried to argue, but I raised my hand. "No. Let me finish. You know what I discovered in the last few days? I discovered that I was married to someone I don't know. And worse, I discovered that this someone I don't know deliberately deceived me. Not by accident. Deliberately. That's not fair," he started. "Fair?" I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was bitter, full of pain. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I sacrificed my bangle? Is it fair that my father is mourning my marriage? Is it fair that my mother cries over a tradition that was broken?" He fell silent. "I needed to believe you were different," I continued, tears returning. "I needed to believe I had found someone who not only accepted who I was, but who celebrated it. And you did that so well for so long that I believed you. But it was all a lie." In the following days, I began to notice a pattern that frightened me. Every time I mentioned something that bothered him during our review lists, he would admit that he had never really agreed. And the more he admitted, more I wondered about other things. About other moments. About other promises. There were times when he said he would support my career above other things if necessary. I asked if that was true. He hesitated. And in that hesitation, I knew it wasn't. There were times when he said he was okay with us living part of the time in my village, so I could be close to my family. When I asked again, he admitted that he really didn't want to do that. There were promises about having children, about how to raise them, about which traditions we would follow. He admitted that he had only agreed with some of them. With each admission, it was as if another layer of our relationship disappeared. And in the end, when I looked at him, it was like looking at a building that had been damaged beyond repair. You could see the structure, but everything that made it beautiful had disintegrated. Why? I asked one night, when he was sitting on my couch, looking desolate. Why did you do this? Why did you pretend for so long? He took a very long time to answer. And when he finally spoke, his voice was so low I could barely hear it. Because I was afraid of losing you, he said. At first, when you showed me how things worked in your culture, I felt intimidated. It seemed like you expected a lot. That if I didn't agree with every detail, you would just leave. So I just agreed with everything. And then, I asked. And then it became easier to keep agreeing than to admit I had lied. You were so happy, so convinced that I understood. And the more time passed, the harder it was to tell the truth. It was easier to just keep pretending. I couldn't even look at him. Because what he was describing wasn't love. It was manipulation. It was cowardice. It was using my own desire to be understood and accepted against me. You know what the real problem is here? I asked, my voice breaking. The real problem is that you didn't just lie to me. You made me question everything. Every beautiful moment we lived, every conversation we had, every promise you made. It's all now contaminated by this doubt. How can I relive our first meeting without thinking about how you were pretending? How can I look at pictures from our dating days without questioning whether there was any truth in them? He tried to apologize again, but I didn't want to hear it. I began to get angry. Not the burning, explosive anger I felt at first, but a deep and quiet anger. The anger of someone who had been systematically deceived and manipulated. The anger of realizing that I had wasted years with someone who had never really wanted to know me. I called my friend Maya, who was one of the few people who knew the whole story. She came and sat with me while I dismantled years of a relationship I had built with so much hope. You know what the worst part is? I told her, as we drank tea that my mother had sent from the village. I thought I had found someone who really understood me. Someone who came from a completely different world, but who was willing to learn. Someone who loved my people as much as I did. Maybe he did love you, said Maya carefully. Maybe he was just too weak to honor it. That's worse, I whispered. Because it means it was a choice. He could have chosen to be honest with me. He could have chosen to say, I'm not sure if I can do this, or I need more time to understand. But instead he lied. A lie that lasted 4 years. My new bangle arrived. My father sent it with a letter that said, for my daughter, who is stronger than any gold. You deserve someone who honors your strength, not someone who minimizes it. When they placed the new bangle on my wrist, it was different from the first. Not just physically, but emotionally. This one was made for a woman who had learned a hard lesson. This was made for a woman who now understood that not everyone who said they loved her culture really meant it. My husband kept showing up. He kept trying. But with each day that passed, I felt more distant from him. It was as if he was slowly disappearing from my sight, becoming a silhouette of someone I once loved. Do you want me to leave? He asked one night. The honest answer was yes. But it wasn't that simple. Because he was my husband legally. Because part of me still hoped, still against all evidence, that he could change, that he could be the person he had pretended to be. I don't know, I answered honestly. I don't know what I want to do now. Do you want me to see a therapist? He offered. We could try couples therapy. No, I said, and my voice was firm. Couples therapy won't fix the fact that you lied to me for 4 years. Couples therapy won't bring back the bangle my father gave me. Couples therapy won't give me back the trust you destroyed. He left the room, and I was left alone, looking at my new bangle in the mirror. It was beautiful, but it wasn't the same, and I knew it never would be. I spent the afternoon thinking about everything I had lost. Not just my original bangle, not just my marriage, but the innocence of believing that love could transcend cultural differences so easily. I learned that love was not enough if there was no honesty, if there was no genuine respect, if there was no willingness to really understand and honor the other person. My phone rang. It was my grandmother, calling from the village. My mother must have told her everything that had happened. She wanted to talk to me. My granddaughter, she said, her voice small and distant through the phone. I heard what happened. Grandmother, I managed to say before breaking into tears. Listen to me, she continued, her voice becoming stronger. In my life, I have seen many marriages. I have seen some people who stayed together because they had to. I have seen others who stayed because they chose, every day, to choose each other. But I have never seen anyone who stayed with someone who disrespected her so fundamentally. What should I do? I asked. What is your heart telling you that you should do? She asked. And I knew the answer. I had always known. I stayed awake all night, looking at my new bangle. My grandmother was right. My heart had made a decision long before my mind was ready to accept it. The next morning, when my husband arrived from the hotel, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cold coffee in front of me. He came in hopefully, as he had done every day, as if that day were different, as if I would suddenly wake up and everything would be fine. But everything was not fine. We need to talk about what happens next, I said calmly. I need to know your plans. He sat down slowly, as if he feared I would break down in tears again. I want you to know that I really tried, he began. I really tried to understand, tried to be better. Stop, I raised my hand. You tried after everything fell apart. That doesn't count. You had 4 years to try. You had countless conversations where you could have been honest with me. You chose not to. He fell silent. I need time, I continued. Time away from you. Time to think clearly without your presence clouding things. Time to discover who I am when I'm not trying to be the person you pretended I was for you. How long? He asked, his voice small. I don't know. Weeks? Months? Possibly forever. I really don't know at this point. He left the kitchen, and I heard the sound of the door closing. A few hours later, I received a message from him saying he had gone back to his city, that he was respecting my space, that he would be patient. Patience. As if patience could fix systematic lies. In the days that followed, I began to deal with practical matters. I needed to talk to a lawyer about annulment. I discovered that, in fact, both ceremonies, both the traditional and the American, could be annulled within a certain period of time. Technically, we hadn't been married long enough for it to be extremely complicated. But legally simple didn't mean emotionally simple. I called my mother. She cried when I told her my decision. Not out of anger, but out of sadness. Sadness for me, for the situation, for the loss. You did the right thing, she said finally. Your father would agree. Is father still grieving? I asked. Your father is grieving a marriage that was never real, my mother replied. He is grieving a truth that was broken, but he is also relieved. Because he knows that his daughter won't spend her life being deceived by someone who should have honored her. I received a call from my husband a few days later. He had visited his own lawyer. He was willing to proceed with the annulment without contest. He was willing to accept whatever I wanted in the terms. Why? I asked, surprised by how cooperative he was being. Because, he said, and I could hear sincerity for the first time in months, I finally understood that you are not mine to keep. You never were. You were a gift that I wasted. I didn't respond. Because even that epiphany didn't change anything. It didn't bring back my bangle. It wouldn't restore my trust. It wouldn't give back those years I wasted building something with someone who was never really there. I signed the annulment papers 2 weeks later. Technically, according to my tradition and according to American law, I had never been married. The wedding that took place had never happened. Both bangles were broken. Mine destroyed by his hands. His still in pieces somewhere, probably never to be repaired. My parents officially mourned my marriage in a small ceremony with just my family. It wasn't joyful as it should have been, but it was necessary to honor what had been lost. More than a month passed. I started going to therapy, not couples therapy, but individual therapy. I needed to really understand how I had let this happen. How I had ignored warning signs for so long. How I had allowed someone to manipulate me so deeply. My therapist, a Black woman named Dr. Patterson who had dealt with cultural trauma in other patients, told me something that stayed with me. What you did was not a mistake, she said. You chose to believe the best in someone. That's not weakness. But you learned an important lesson. Not everyone who says they understand your culture really does. And not everyone who says they love you is actually willing to respect who you are. How can I trust someone again? I asked. You will trust again, she answered, when you find someone whose actions consistently match their words. Someone who honors you not just when it's convenient or beautiful, but always. Maya took me out. For the first time in weeks, I did something that didn't involve thinking about my husband, ex-husband, or the situation. We went to a restaurant that served food from my region, and I ate those fruits that my grandmother grew. And yes, they had that smell my ex had joked about. But this time, instead of feeling pain, I felt a connection to my grandmother, to my mother, to all the women of my family who had come before me. They had survived far more than this. And I would survive too. I received a message from my father a few days later. He had posted a new photo, a picture of me wearing my new bangle, smiling, but this time a smile that had depth, that had wisdom. A caption in my language that, when translated, said, "My daughter is free. My daughter is strong. My daughter deserves only those who honor her completely." That photo received hundreds of comments from people in my village, words of support, messages saying I had done the right thing, that my family's honor was intact. But I also received messages from friends of mine here in the United States. People who didn't understand why I had wasted everything over a bangle. People who thought I should try a little harder to make the marriage work. I blocked many of them, because their opinions didn't matter. There was nothing that mattered except that I had chosen myself. I had chosen my integrity. I had chosen my culture. I had chosen to respect myself to the point of not accepting disrespect from anyone, no matter how much I loved them. I also received messages from my ex. Initially, they were pleading, attempts to make me reconsider. Then, when he saw that I wouldn't respond, they became more reflective. He talked about therapy he was doing, about how he was beginning to understand how deeply he had hurt me. I read the messages, but I didn't respond. Because his journey of self-discovery was not my responsibility. My responsibility was to myself. About 2 months after the annulment was finalized, I received a package. It came from his address. My heart jumped. I hoped they weren't more pleas. Inside was the bangle he had cut, not the melted and ruined one, but a new one. One he had specially made. A note was inside. "I understand now that I can't do this. I can't wear this because it would be a lie. I am not your husband. I cannot claim to be honored with your tradition when I didn't honor you. This bangle is for you, not as a symbol of our marriage, which should never have happened, but as a symbol of my apologies. Maybe you can give it to someone in your family who honors what it represents. Someone who would never lie. Someone who would never break the trust you place in them." I looked at the bangle. It was beautiful, made with care, made with what I could tell was genuine remorse. But it wasn't mine. And it wasn't his. It was just a bangle. Just gold. I called my father. He sent a new bangle, I told him. He said to give it to someone in the family who deserves it. My father was silent for a moment. "What do you want to do with it?" he finally asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to send it back. Part of me feels like it would be a waste." "Let me handle it," said my father. "Your cousin is getting married next year. Maybe this bangle can have a second life with someone who will honor it from the beginning." I agreed. And there was something comforting in knowing that from that disaster, from that betrayal, from that bangle that had been cut and melted, something beautiful could emerge. A new beginning. A new story. But that story was not mine to tell. My story continued, but now it was different. It was the story of a woman who had learned that loving someone didn't mean sacrificing her integrity. It meant finding someone who loved her integrity more than anything else. It meant waiting. And despite everything, even with my broken heart, even with my dreams in ruins, I still believed that day would come. That I would find someone who didn't just say they loved my culture, but who would really honor it. Who wouldn't say one thing and do another. Who would choose the truth, always, even when it was difficult. Until then, I had my new bangle. I had my family. I had my village, even though it was 5,000 kilometers away. And above all, I had myself. And that was enough. The months followed in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't exactly bad, but it wasn't good either. It was like living in a vacuum, between what was and what could be. I returned to my work with renewed focus. My boss had noticed that I was different, more determined somehow. He didn't ask about my personal life, and I was grateful for that. Work became my refuge, the place where I could be just professional, just competent, without having to think about relationships or traditions or gold bangles. But even at work, there were moments when something hurt me. A client would mention his wife, how wonderful she was, how he honored her. And I would have to step away for a few minutes, pretend I had something important to do, just to breathe and remind myself that not every man was like my ex-husband. My mother called regularly. At first, her calls were about me, about how I was doing, if I was eating well, if I was sleeping well. But gradually, the calls began to have more content. She told me about life in the village, about how my cousin was preparing for his wedding, the wedding that would use the bangle my ex had made. "Your family is happy," my mother said in one call. "Your cousin specifically asked for that bangle. He said it represents the lesson that even pain can be transformed into something beautiful." "Does he know?" I asked. "About everything?" Yes, my mother answered. Your story is now part of our family. It's part of our history. You did nothing wrong, dear. You simply chose to respect yourself. I received invitations to my cousin's wedding. Initially, I was reluctant to go. The idea of going back to the village, of seeing all those happy relationships, seemed like too much right now. It seemed like I was asking for my heart to be heard again. But my grandmother called. You will come. It was not a question. It was a decree. Grandmother, I don't know if I can, I said honestly. You can and you will, she answered, her voice admitting no objection. Because you are a strong woman, and because that wedding is also about you. It's about a lesson your generation needs to learn. That respect is more important than convenience. That honor is more important than appearance. Come. So I went. When I arrived at the village after almost a year and a half since I had left to get married, it was as if time had both stopped and accelerated simultaneously. Everything seemed the same, but I was completely different. My family embraced me at the airport. My mother cried. My father just looked me in the eyes and nodded, as if confirming that I had made the right choice. The week before the wedding was filled with preparations. Women from the village came offering to help, cooking, decorating, preparing. And as we worked together, they shared stories. Stories of their own marriages. Stories of relationships that worked because there was honesty. Stories of relationships that didn't work because there was no respect. An older woman, the mother of a childhood friend of mine, approached me while I was helping to hang decorations. I heard about your marriage, she said calmly. And I heard that you were strong enough to leave. I don't feel strong, I admitted. I feel broken. Broken is different from weak, she answered with wisdom. Broken means you were tested and you're still here. Still whole. Still honoring yourself. That is strength. The night before the wedding, my grandmother called me to her room. She was older now, more fragile, and I suddenly realized how much she had aged in recent years. My dear granddaughter, she began, holding my hand. I wanted to tell you about my own marriage. I had never heard that story. My grandfather had passed away years ago. Your grandfather was not an easy man, she said, her eyes distant. He was stubborn. He had ideas about how things should be. And in the early years of our marriage, he frequently tried to convince me to abandon parts of my identity that he felt didn't fit into his vision of the world. What did you do? I asked. I left him, she said simply. Not forever, but for a time. I went to my mother's house. And I left a clear message. I would only come back if he really wanted me. All of me, with my traditions, my culture, my identity. Or he could continue down that path alone. Did he change? I asked. Eventually, she nodded. It took time. It took difficult conversations. It took him really seeing that he was losing the marriage because he was trying to force it to be something it wasn't. But when he finally understood, when he really chose to honor me and my culture instead of trying to reshape it, our marriage became real. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because, she said, squeezing my hand, I want you to know that your story doesn't end here. Your story continues. And the next time you find someone, you will know what to look for. You will know that it's not enough for him to say beautiful things. You will need to see him act according to those words, repeatedly, consistently. You will have patience, but not infinite tolerance. And you will honor yourself above all else. My cousin's wedding was beautiful. It was everything my own wedding should have been, full of genuine joy, mutual respect, two families coming together in celebration. And when they placed that bangle, the one that had been made by my ex, the one that had been transformed into something new, on the wrist of my cousin's wife, there was a moment of silence in the room. Everyone knew the story of that bangle. Everyone knew where it had come from. My cousin approached me during the celebration and hugged me. Thank you, he whispered. For what? I asked, confused. For being brave enough to say no, he answered. For showing me that honor and respect are not negotiable. I promise I will wear this bangle with gratitude, not just for my wife, but also in your memory, the memory of a woman who loved her culture more than she loved convenience. That night, lying in bed in the room where I grew up, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't healing was still a distant process. But it was acceptance. It was peace. It was the knowledge that I had done the right thing, even though it had cost everything. My phone vibrated. A message from a number I didn't recognize. A contact that my father had sent. A man from the neighboring village, someone who had grown up here, who had gone to school with me, who was now a teacher and worked at a university in the capital. The message was simple. I heard you were home. Would you like to have coffee? My first instinct was to refuse. My heart was still too fragile. But then I thought about what my grandmother had said. That my story didn't end here. that there was more to live. It wasn't about this man. It could be no one. But it was about me being open to possibilities again. It was about believing that there were men who honored women with their words and actions. I responded, yes, that would be nice. When we met at the cafe the next day, it was strange. He was familiar, but he was also a stranger. We had grown up together, but we had become different people in recent years. Congratulations on your courage, was the first thing he said. I blinked confused. How do you know about that? My mother knows your mother, he answered with a smile. News travels fast in a village. And what I heard is that you chose to respect yourself above everything else. That is rare. That is beautiful. It's also painful, I said honestly. Yes, he agreed. But is it less painful now? I thought about it. And I realized that yes, it was. Time was still recent, and there were moments when the pain returned with force. But there were also moments of joy. Moments when I felt grateful for my own life, for my own choices. Yes, I answered. It's less painful. Good, he said. Because I think you deserve someone who would have honored you from day one, without needing 4 years to figure it out. I didn't commit to anything at that cafe, but I also didn't close the door. And for someone who had learned that truth and honesty were fundamental in any relationship, that was enough. I spent 2 more weeks in the village. I visited places I had frequented in childhood. I ate with my grandmother. I talked with my mother about things we hadn't had time to talk about in years. I walked through the streets and felt that deep connection to a place that would never stop being my home. When it was time to return to the United States, my father drove me to the airport. On the way, he said only one thing. Are you okay? Yes, father, I answered, and for the first time since everything had happened, I really meant it. Because, you can come back whenever you need to, right? You will always have a home here. I know, father. And now I know that it's enough. When I returned to my apartment in the United States, everything seemed different. Or perhaps I was different. Perhaps both were true. I had received a promotion at work while I was away. My boss had left a welcome letter saying that my work had been exceptional and that he wanted to give me more responsibilities. An opportunity to lead. I accepted immediately. I started going out a little more. I wasn't looking for a relationship, I really wasn't. But I was living. I was experiencing. I was allowing myself to feel joy again. I received a call from my ex about 3 months after my return from the village. It was the first time I had heard his voice since I signed the annulment papers. Hi, he said, his voice nervous. How are you? Well, I answered and I meant it. I wanted to tell you that I did therapy. A lot of therapy. And I'm beginning to really understand why I did what I did and how it hurt you. That's great, I said sincerely. I'm happy that you're working on yourself. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I really am. You deserved better. You deserved honor from day one. I really did deserve that, I agreed. And now I'm learning to accept only that from anyone who enters my life. There was a long pause. I'm happy for you, he said finally. Even if it means I'm out of your life. I'm grateful for that, I responded. And then I hung up. It wasn't a cathartic ending. There was no drama or grand words. It was just the end. Finally, 6 months later, I received an invitation to an art exhibition at the local gallery. The card was elegant, minimalist. My heart jumped when I saw the artist's name. It was my cousin. I went alone, wearing my new bangle visibly on my wrist. The exhibition was about legacy and transformation, a series of photographs and art pieces that told stories of families, of traditions, of how pain could be converted into beauty. A centerpiece was several photos from my cousin's wedding. But not just the happy photos. There was also a series titled The Bangle That Survived, artistic images of the bangle that had come from my disaster, now on his wife's wrist, surrounded by golden light. The description beside it said, dedicated to my cousin, who chose honor above convenience. This bangle traveled through 2 lives, 2 cultures, 2 stories. But only when it found someone willing to respect it completely did it truly flourish. I was crying when I read that. My cousin approached, hugging me. You came, he said happily. I needed you to see this. It's perfect, I whispered. The exhibition was a success. People came and asked about the story of that bangle. And my cousin told them, not in a way to shame me, but to teach. He talked about respect, about tradition, about how a woman had been brave enough to say no. A week later, my ex-husband called again. This time, his voice was different. There was anger in it. Why did you tell our story to the whole city? He asked, furious. Why did your family publish it like some kind of of moral lesson. I told nothing, I answered calmly. My family honored my courage by sharing the truth. If you're embarrassed, maybe it's because you know you did something wrong. You destroyed my reputation, he said. No, I answered, my voice firm as it had never been. You destroyed your own reputation when you destroyed my bangle. You destroyed it when you lied. You destroyed it when you chose your comfort above my respect. I just refused to carry that shame for you. And then I hung up. This time for good. I blocked his number. I blocked his social media. I erased every photo of us I still had. It wasn't anger. It was liberation. It was the final moment of letting him go completely. Months later, I learned that he had moved to another state, that he had started a new job, that he was trying to start over. And I genuinely wished him to find the peace he was looking for. But it wasn't my job to offer him that forgiveness. My job was with myself. A year after the annulment, I returned to the village again. This time, not for someone else's wedding. This time it was to celebrate myself. My family had organized a small ceremony to mark 1 year of my courage. It wasn't a baptism. It wasn't a wedding. It was just a recognition. A celebration of a woman who had chosen herself. My grandfather, who had been so silent at first, hugged me and whispered, "You made us proud, not because you left the marriage, but because you loved yourself enough to leave it." That night, I lay under the stars on the roof of my childhood home, wearing my bangle, feeling more complete than I had felt in years. My phone vibrated. A message from the man I had had coffee with in the village. He had moved to my city now, to be near me. Not because I had asked, but because he had chosen to. The message said, "Missing you. Want to have dinner tomorrow?" For the first time, I smiled at a message from a man not out of hope, but out of certainty. Of knowing that if something didn't work out, I wouldn't break. That I had learned that my worth didn't depend on anyone. I answered, "Yes, but this time, I invite you to get to know my life here. All of it." And as I sent that message, I touched my bangle. The one that was new, but that carried the same ancestral tradition. And I felt that finally I had come home. Not to a place, but to myself. If this story touched you in any way, please like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of overcoming injustice. Your comments and support make all the difference for other people who may be going through similar situations. Until the next story.